I want to welcome you all today. I'm very excited to be emceeing this wonderful opportunity today for you to hear some terrific, wise, and lovely women speak. This is about former member guilt and the path to self-forgiveness. It's an extremely important discussion, extremely important topic. I'm Rachel Bernstein. I'm a therapist, and I've been working with former cult members and their families for 25 years. And I want to tell you a little bit about Nori Muster. Nori was a member of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness from 1978 to 1988. She's the author of quite a few books: The Betrayal of the Spirit, My Life Behind the Headlines of the Krishna Movement, The Cult Survivor's Handbook, 7 Paths to an Authentic Life, and Child of the Cult. She has a master's from Western Oregon University and is currently an adjunct professor at Mesa Community College in Arizona. And she will be speaking first. I also want to talk a little bit about Lorna, who I've known forever. She is a board member and a past president of the ISKCON. She's a psychoanalyst and dean of faculty at the Institute for Psychoanalytic Studies. She and her husband, Bill, who's right over there, have been facilitating support groups for former members, get this, since 1976. What a gift. And she has written extensively on the subject and is widely published in both professional journals and books. So Nori, take it away.
Okay, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I had a very troubled adolescence. I went away to college in Northern California, and my senior year of college I joined ISKCON, and I moved into the temple the day after graduation. So I was at the Los Angeles temple for 10 years, and then I left and I got a master's degree at Western Oregon University, working with abused children and juvenile sex offenders. Then I moved back to Arizona, and this whole time I was writing my memoir about ISKCON, which was Betrayal of the Spirit. And that came out about 10 years after I left ISKCON. Then I got into real estate, and here I am. So I did a lot of research to prepare for this panel, for this presentation. I interviewed a couple of ex-Hare Krishna members to see if they experienced anything like I experienced as far as the guilt. I read a book about guilt. I talked to my counselor about my guilt and about guilt in general about 5 times over the last year. And I did a lot of journaling on the subject to try to decide what to talk about today. One of the things I learned from all my research was that guilt is one of the main games that we play in life, in society. People are always judging each other, like he's good, he's bad, or this was good, that was bad, or you're good, you're bad. So we're all wrapped up in guilt. It's a very, very common thing. And guilt, actually, the purpose of guilt, or one of the reasons why people get stuck in guilt, is because guilt covers up pain. So if you don't want to feel the pain, you can feel the guilt, and that actually feels less awful, I guess, but when you feel the pain, then you just you can feel it, you can sit with it, and you can release it, which is what should have happened. You know, people carry guilt for a long time. They carry the pain for a long time. And then when you finally get with the pain and understand it, then you can let it go. So it's actually a process you can work through. The kind of guilt that I got from ISKCON falls into several categories. From the leadership of ISKCON, from my gurus and the people that I was around, I learned how to lie. I learned how to steal, and those are actually kind of holdovers from my troubled adolescence. But I also became arrogant, and I was just taking after the leaders. One thing in particular that I carried a lot of guilt about for a long time was the murder of Sulochan, Stephen Bryant. He was shot in the head in Los Angeles. And as soon as I heard that he had been murdered, I knew who did it. I didn't know the name of the man who would have shot him, but I knew who did the murder. And being that close to a murder of a friend, Sulochan was my friend, it just made me feel really guilty that I was that wrapped up in it. I felt guilty for getting people to join. And actually one of the women that I got to join, or helped her join, ended up in an abusive marriage where her husband beat her, and she told me about it. And I said, why don't you tell the people at the temple? And she said she had, but she hadn't gotten any kind of response. And I tried to counsel her. She later got out of that marriage. But I got a lot of people to join, and I feel bad about that. I also, because of working in the public relations department, I took part in, I knew a lot of the secrets of the organization, and I wasn't really allowed to talk about it with anyone outside the department. So I carried a lot of the secrets, and I helped in the cover-up. Our department did a lot of publications to try to make the organization look good. And one of the biggest things I felt guilty about was that I believed in the lie, and I was willing to lie for them and cover up for them. And I should have known better. Like, it just should have been a part of me that knew better. So my guilt manifested in two basic ways. The first one is when you beat yourself up, like you're lying in bed at night and you go, oh, I shouldn't have I cut in line in front of that guy, I feel so bad about it. Or, oh, I should have left a bigger tip. Ooh, I feel bad, I didn't do that. Or, oh, God, I forgot that guy's name and I said the wrong name. Ooh. And you get this kind of like a little electric shock. Ooh, like you're lying in bed trying to sleep and it gets you. So that's one kind of guilt. And then the other kind of guilt, which I really think is more interesting, is the kind of guilt which would be called kind of a religious guilt, where you're constantly interplaying with God, and you do something bad and then God punishes you, and then where he sets up a challenge for you, like, oh God, why did they run out of water? It must have been God. Or why did the light turn red? It must have been I was bad. Or like it's just this constant interplay with God. And it could, other names for it might be like instant karma, or magical thinking, like you think something's happening, it's not really happening. Or superstition, like step on a crack, break your mother's back, that kind of thing. Or like childlike thinking, like children might think they have angry thoughts toward their parents, and then one of the parents dies, and then they think they caused it because of their anger. A lot of my guilt, a lot of my trigger was just guilt of being angry, because in the Hare Krishnas we weren't allowed to be angry or express anger. So whenever I did express anger, or lost my temper, or said something bad about one of the leaders, I would be overcome by guilt and dread, because I would be waiting for what was the next bad thing that was going to happen and punish me because I had become angry. I really bought into this stuff. So in the group they had a word for that, and that was that Krishna would smash you. Like if you did something against the leadership, Krishna would smash you. So I went through years of being smashed by Krishna by things that weren't even anything connected with us. But the group would do, like in their lectures in the temple, they would track certain issues that would go on in the outside world to show how much better we were. So whenever there was terrorism, or in the Middle East, there was a lot going on over there at the time, or an election was coming, like they were all for Reagan because he was anti-abortion. So the group itself would track certain things because they considered themselves somewhat political. So the kinds of things that I thought that my anger would cause would be like earthquakes, because those happened all the time, wars or bad elections, or things with my family, like if someone in my family got sick or something happened with my friends, I would just blame myself, obviously, because I had gotten mad at this leader and caused all this stuff. So, but it's kind of like in the Middle Ages when they had witches. People would blame women for what would go wrong. Like if there was a plague would come through, it would be a witch, it would be a woman, because they're witchy and they cast spells on you. And so I think in the group, women kind of got tagged that way, that if something bad happened, they'd kind of look around like, which woman cursed that guy? Or, there was kind of a feeling like that in the group. And also I had sort of a background with that as a teenager, part of my troubled adolescence. I had friends that were into witchcraft and the I Ching and tarot cards and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of believed in those things. But the guilt kind of, the way I kind of got a sense of control was that if I say like I did something bad, and the trigger is always something bad I did. And I did something bad, and then something bad happened in the outside world. I had a sense of control because then I could go into like praying and asking Krishna like, oh, I'm so sorry, I was so angry, I should never get angry, and please, help humanity, and we don't want this war. So I would go into this kind of like prayer thing that would kind of assuage, petition God to stop, whatever bad I had caused. When I interviewed the ex-Hare Krishna men, none of them could really identify with what I'd been through. One of them suggested maybe if you got angry that you would be contributing to a bad thing happening. Just like when we fill up our gas tank, we're kind of contributing to the oil monopoly and our energy. But I don't think it happened to men that much. I think it was more of a woman thing, because we were sort of the scapegoat for everything in that group. But I've been working with my counselor on this for about 8 years, so I don't do this anymore. I don't assign things to myself anymore, and it was kind of hard to get out of it. But luckily, my counselor went to parochial school, and she told me this sort of just recently when we were working on my presentation. She said that she could sense this in her peers growing up. That, in the Catholic Church, they're pretty superstitious and they have a lot of guilt, Catholic guilt. And they would say, any situation you get into, you have to look for what God's teaching you. Like, what lesson are you going to get from this? Or what is God trying to show you by putting you in a situation? And it wasn't just like, hey, you could learn something from it. It was like, the purpose of this is that God wants you to learn something from this. So she told me that she never bought into it. So she was able to recognize it in me and help me get over it. So it's been a several-year process. But I asked her recently, is that like schizophrenia or what is it? And she said, no, it's just delusional thinking. It's not like it's just like a wrong way of thinking about things. And she taught me the trigger for that. If I ever question, is this real? Is this really happening because of me? Just look back, does it mean I was bad? And that would be the trigger, that it's part of my superstitions. We call it my superstitions. Like I'd go into counseling, I want to talk about my superstitions today. This happened. So if I hadn't have been healed, this whole thing with the terrorism this month, I would have been all over it. So anyway, another thing about guilt that I learned that I wanted to share with you is that you can't really wish it away. You can't just say, I'm free of guilt. And, because it's a feeling in your body, and your body has memorized it and practiced it for so long that it will come back. Like your mind can say, I forgive myself, I'm free of guilt. But then you're lying in bed and it's like a physical feeling. Oh, why did I do that? Oh. It's like a squeezing in your gut. And then the thing where you're worried about God punishing you, it's like this. Like that. Like it's a feeling. And to get rid of a feeling in your body takes a lot of work. So one of the things that I did to really help wash away my guilt was when I wrote my memoir. Because I was able to say things that I wasn't allowed to say in the group. And I learned a lot more about it. Like I learned about all the scandals that I had been covering up for. And I read articles and I did a lot of research for my book. And then when the book came out, within a year of it coming out, I learned that I was part of the problem. I was one of the leaders in the organization, and I was in the PR department, and I did a lot of cover-ups, and I was guilty along with the leaders that I was criticizing. And I had been repressing that. I had no idea. I thought when I wrote my book, it would be like a whistleblower, like telling what happened in this bad group, and I would be sort of like a hero for revealing the secrets. But it turned out, and I got a few reviews that said this, that I was part of the problem. And that felt really good. I was like, yeah, I was part of the problem. And that helped me kind of get in touch with what was true. And so it helped me release the guilt because, it was true. And I had been ignoring that part of it. So, and then the last piece that I want to share with you. When I was preparing for this presentation, I talked to a lot of people about the ideas in it. And they said, well, that kind of sounds like, like what if you're thinking of someone and then they call you? Or like you walk outside and all of a sudden a rainbow appears. Or you're kind of humming a song in your head and then they play it on the radio or on the Muzak. Isn't that the kind of the same thing? And so I found out that it's not at all the same thing. When you have that's called a synchronicity or a serendipity, an instance of serendipity. And that's not guilt-based. It's not based on guilt. And it's not magical thinking. It's just something that happens. Like we all have those coincidences. And in fact, in literature, a lot of books, every story is based on a synchronicity because it's just a normal thing. It's like the music, the background of our life is synchronicity. Because we live in a small world and things just happen at the same time sometimes. And every story is based on a synchronicity. Like if you think about a mystery novel or a mystery story, the detective, there has to be a synchronicity where the detective finds that clue. They're in the right place at the right time to get the clue that then solves the mystery. Or in a romance story, the two people always meet. It's always like a synchronicity how they meet. They happen to bump into each other, or they happen to meet through some friends or something. There's always a synchronicity in a love story. And in an adventure story, the hero just happens to be at the right place where he can just dash in there and solve the crime. So there's always, synchronicity is really common, and it's not at all what I'm talking about with this sort of negative blaming, thinking that we cause things to happen that are real. So that's basically what I wanted to convey to you all. So thank you for letting me.
Well, when Nori asked me to join her in this presentation, I thought of the 2 sessions that I have at the SGA workshop and some of the ideas from those sessions, which are difficult sessions at the end of the workshop. But I think some of these ideas help relieve ultimate self-guilt and the torture that people do towards themselves. But I first thought I would go into a little bit the environment of the cult that so much plays into these harsh attitudes that former cult members have towards themselves. So what I'm addressing is influence on the development of cult character that can be softened by forgiveness. The harsh conscience, the perfectionistic character, and the abuser-victim dynamics of many former cult members. Cult leaders lack compassion. We all know that. Compassion is a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow for another who is stricken by misfortune, accompanied by a strong desire to alleviate the suffering. Cult members are exploited, controlled, and shamed by the cult leader. Compassion, our natural compassion, is replaced by contempt for personal weakness. So instead of compassion, the cult leader is showing contempt. Cult leaders induce dissociation. So this is another element that plays into the people that we become while we're in the cult. We're in an uncompassionate environment. We're in a dissociative state. Dissociative identity disorder is a disruption of identity characterized by two or more distinct personality states involving marked discontinuity in sense of self and sense of agency, accompanied by related alterations in affect, behavior, consciousness, memory, perception, cognition, and sensory or motor functioning. In the office, I often see people who've come out of cults fairly recently, who I would diagnose initially, at least I would have a tentative diagnosis of other specified dissociative disorder. This is an identity disturbance due to prolonged and intense coercive persuasion, initials who have been subjected to intense coercive persuasion, brainwashing, thought reform, indoctrination, while captive, torture, long-term political imprisonment, recruitment by sex cults, or by terror organizations. Many present with prolonged changes in our conscious questioning of their identity. This is part of DSM-5 for therapists. So some people call a version of this the Stockholm Syndrome. Another element that goes on in the cult environment, you could see as identification with the aggressor. Ferenczi spoke of this. When we feel overwhelmed by inescapable threat, we might identify with the aggressor. Hoping to survive, we sense and become precisely what the attacker expects of us in our behavior and perceptions. Identification with the aggressor is a dissociative process utilized by members who need to protect themselves and prove their loyalty. When a victim believes the same values as the aggressor no longer is perceived as a threat.
Excuse me, is the aggressor in this case the cult leader?
The cult leader.
Yeah.
I should have made that clear, of course. It's the cult leader. So this is happening to people in cults. In addition to what you've talked about, the coercive persuasion at the outset, the deception, all the trance-inducing techniques that put you into dissociation to make you feel more vulnerable and more receptive to this possibly happening. In addition to incorporating the abuser's behavior, dress, and ideology, cult members identify with the leader's contemptuous and punitive attitudes towards them and others. Yet at the same time this is going on, there might be one piece, or more than one piece, of perception that resists giving itself up. These doubts that probably all of you had, stemming from previously held contradictory beliefs, cause conflict for the member, right? In cults, it is negative to doubt. Doubts are either reinterpreted as some version of demonic influence or some sign of faithlessness. Therefore, doubts are suppressed with thought-stopping phrases and hypnotic techniques, which can include chanting, prayer, or meditation. Cult trauma. The possibility of open expression as well as open vulnerability is cut off when a child or a repressed adult must associate genuine beliefs, feelings, and behavior as a way of maintaining attachment to a frightening, neglectful, or abusive cult leader. Devaluation stems from the members' incorporation of the leader's attitude. Over time, the member's personality becomes more self-contained. Influence of an all-powerful cult leader.
What do you mean self-contained?
Parents become neglectful or abusive to their children when they primarily must respond to the leader's wishes, which are demanding. There is displacement of parental authority to the leader, and parents move into the sibling role with their children. This defensive strategy is reinforced when many children in cults learn in order to be strong, loved, and to succeed, they must be aggressive to other members. For example, children who fear an all-knowing cult leader will protect themselves by tattling on or rebuking others, even parents. The complexity of human beings. A few members somehow are able to tolerate continuing to feel the pain of the abuse and therefore empathize with others. Some of you might have vacillated between both of these behaviors. This creates conflict within the recruit, in which most members attempt to resolve through mind-numbing measures. Human behavior is complex, and individuals unconsciously show traits of identification in some areas, but not in others. Struggles in leaving the cult attitude behind. The most effective recovery from traumatic helplessness and fear can occur only after the traumatic situation is no longer a reality. Initially, positive identifications with those who rebel against the tyrant can help break the leader's spell. Later, the compassionate attitudes of new relationships in post-cult life can create a more compassionate conscience. Nori talked about her relationship with her therapist, and that allowed her to have a more compassionate conscience. Also, new relationships can be experienced as negotiations in which participants speak their minds rather than showing their need of defending against their emotions by acting them out through self-destructive behaviors such as addictions, fights, eating disorders, cutting, etc. common experiences of leaving, continued self-sacrifice, lack of self-care, difficulty in seeing positive aspects of self, which include members' resourcefulness, courage, action to improve life, hardworking, conflicts over pleasure, sense of failure, fear of outside world, leading to a lot of anxiety, fear of going to hell, being due to failure, getting sick, becoming impoverished, dying, becoming an evildoer, sitting duck syndrome. Split black and white world, fear of and desire to engage in cult activities, forbidden,
Could you
yes,
explain the sitting duck syndrome?
yes, okay, that's by Clough, it's his idea, that if we're used to having one kind of relationship, and that's our example of a love relationship, and it's an abuser-victim relationship, for example, we're blind to the element of that potentially going on in new relationships. That's the template for love. And therefore, we can fall into new relationships that repeat that old relationship. Yes.
I was just thinking that when I was talking yesterday, that's what I did recently. Fell for a man who still had those patterns from my ex-husband, and I just realized, okay, where's Love Addiction Anonymous?
That's love. Split black and white world. Fear of and desire to engage in forbidden cult activities. Lack of moderation. Feeling different. Tendency to split off past but replay past in the present. Confused sense of morality, dual personality, demand for perfection. Mechanism used by the cult to manipulate members. Possibility of perfection can lead to depression. Goal, increase appreciation for positive aspects of self, while decreasing perfectionistic drive. So how did members move on? Forgiveness of self and others. This PowerPoint was developed for SGAs, so a lot of it is applicable to them, but I've changed it a little to be more inclusive to all former cult members. Positive interpersonal experience. A positive interpersonal experience often is required to occur before it can become internalized into a loving conscience. So after the cult, there can be a shift as a result of a positive interpersonal experience. The ability to comfort is usually acquired through the experience of having a comforting parent or a parental substitute. Children who have lacked adequate soothing and comforting experiences generally have more difficulty providing themselves with comforting thoughts and a comforting developing conscience. Comforting parents calm children's distress. Reassure children that they understand children are trying their best, but mistakes can happen. You made a mistake versus you are a mistake, or you are bad. Have confidence that children will learn from being soothed in different circumstances and will learn from their mistakes. This learning will enhance self-esteem. Comforted children gain comfort from parents and additional kind parental figures, including teachers, grandparents, and other caretakers. They incorporate a soothing attitude that develops into a naturally loving conscience. Initially, they can become flooded with shame if they don't live up to their ideals, but a soothing attitude from others reduces these feelings and shame moves into guilt. Shame floods one's entire identity with feelings of badness, while guilt focuses on behavior and negative actions taken. Development of a self-blaming attitude. The natural dependency of small children and regressed cult members on those who are abusive in traumatic circumstances leads to a feeling of shame. Children and regressed recruits automatically will join with the attitude of shaming adults. They will blame themselves for acts, thoughts, and even situations over which they have no control. That's what Nori was talking about. She was trained to blame herself for earthquakes, right?
Well, I think we all were, like, if we had bad thoughts, it would make our guru so sick he couldn't get up at 4 in the morning to come to the morning services, and it was our fault, and we would hear about it. So, yeah, like your guru's not here this morning, and he said it's because his disciples have had, sinning thoughts, or whatever they call it.
And that's typical of cults.
Yeah.
Development. The feeling of shame initially stems from a feeling of being exposed. There is shaming and harsh consequences for negative actions. Since negative thoughts are interpreted by the cult leader as expressions of evilness, cult members are made to feel bad and punished for angry thoughts. Additionally, cult members learn that for survival, it is necessary to keep angry thoughts away from the cult leader, who must be seen as perfect and omniscient. This leads to members typically turning anger inward onto themselves and blaming themselves for negative thoughts. If they are not living up to the impossible cult ideal, members blame themselves. There's always an impossible cult ideal that you're not living up to. So you're always feeling bad about yourself. Therefore, for many sources, they learn a pattern of inhibiting aggression and turning aggression against themselves. The price of a wish for individuation. If cult members incorporate the undermining message that they must serve the needs of others rather than their own needs, to act in their self-interest might be seen as shameful, and this behavior becomes hidden. So there might have been times in the cult that you acted in your own self-interest, but you were flooded with shame and you hid it. You didn't let people know about it. The cult world of punishment sets the stage for a world of punishment and self-defeating behavior after the cult. There might be a tendency to unconsciously, repeatedly place oneself into shamefully humiliating situations in order to buy off a punishing conscience. Putting yourself, because you feel you're bad and you need to be punished, and therefore you don't protect yourself. Former cult members, particularly SGAs, might not have developed good bullshit detectors. That's when they're sitting ducks, right? They don't develop, and that's Gina Katina gave me that idea, to prevent troubling relationships. They might unconsciously repeat their relationships with the cult leader with new people because of the familiarities of these personality types and a way in which they are used to relating. The cult world of punishment sets the stage for a world of punishment and self-defeating. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that already? Intentional or not intentional. When someone harms us and we assume it was intentional, we become angry. However, if we discover it was unintentional in some way, we might forgive that person. It is human to make mistakes. We often make mistakes in everyday life, do things that have harmful consequences or that we didn't intend. We might blame the wrong person or forget about important events. We often think that we have more of a choice than we do, or we often think that we have less of a choice than we do. Degrees of responsibility. Sometimes we judge a person to be so mentally limited that we think it is inappropriate to hold him or her responsible. Sometimes it is difficult to draw a clear-cut distinction between innocence and guilt. Are bystanders guilty? We might judge bystanders as guilty. However, if bystanders are children, or those who are frozen by fear, we might understand that they would be too threatening a situation to be able to stand up to a perpetrator. Young adults come into my office all the time and talk about how they didn't protect sisters and brothers against the cult leader. And they were 6 or 7 or 8 or 4, and they blame themselves for it. And it's hard, it's so important for them to understand how little they were and how big and frightening the cult leader was and how frozen by fear they were. What is the intention of the cult leader? To gain control over you, to shame you, to exploit you? What is the intention of your parents? Now this is a tricky one because former cult members are all kinds of parents. SGAs have all different kinds of parents. Did your parents enter the group with positive altruistic motives or simply the desire for a spiritual life? Or did they enter the group as an attempt to rectify their own inner demons or conflicts? Did the cult leader exploit your parents' initial naivete? What was the intention of parents' behavior in the group? Did they use cult practices to reinforce and justify their own harsh attitudes? Did they have difficulty dealing with the fact that you were being neglected and abused, and at times, did they attempt to protect you? Did they throw you under the bus or callously accept your pain in order to curry favor with the cult leader or to make life easier for themselves in the cult? Did they use cult practices to reinforce and justify their own attitude? Did they have difficulty dealing with the fact that you were being neglected and abused, and at times, did they attempt to protect you? Did I read this already?
The last one.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll get down to, were they dissociated, that is, enthralled with or terrified by the cult leader and out of touch with reality? We can change the unrealistic desire for perfection in human relationships and become more open to forgiving others, including our parents, if they acknowledge harm or for not fulfilling all that we had hoped. Forgiveness. If our parents truly are heartbroken about our cult experience, can we forgive them? If our parents are damaged souls, what do we owe them? If our and by damaged souls, I mean those who come out of cults in such bad shape that they can't comfort you very much. And they really want you to take care of them, to parent them. And how much do you owe them? How much do you owe a parent in that shape? If our parents are in true denial of the harm we have suffered and cannot acknowledge our suffering, what do we owe them? Reality and understanding intention. We are getting a better sense of reality by understanding who our parents are and their intention. It gives us a better perspective and means giving up the idea that we can force perfection to occur no matter what the cost, defined by others to gain love. Intention also gives us the perspective to give up the idea of being defined by others to gain love. If we can give up the notion of being defined by others, we can act in our own self-interest and establish firmer boundaries for ourselves. What is forgiveness? Forgiveness is the peace you feel when you let go of obsessive thoughts. Forgiveness is for you, not the offender. Forgiveness is taking back your power. Forgiveness is about your health and not about the people who hurt you. Forgiveness is about your healing and not about the people who hurt you. Forgiveness helps you gain control over your feelings. Forgiveness is becoming a hero instead of a victim. Forgiveness is a choice. What forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not condoning bad behavior or unkindness. Forgiveness is not forgetting that something painful happened to you. Forgiveness is not reconciling with the offender. Forgiveness is not meaning that you have to deny or minimize your feelings. Forgiveness does not exclude or preclude justice. Forgiveness does not have to be an otherworldly or religious experience. These are from Luskin, Forgive for Good. Mistakes are inevitable in life and therapy. Therapy is a place where mistakes are put to good use. It is important for therapists to apologize for mistakes. It is important for therapists to focus upon the client's inability to forgive after an appropriate apology is given. This inability might interfere with the development of trust and closeness in relationships in present life. It is problematic if there is only absoluteness in personality, rather than toleration for ambiguities, complexities, and human frailties. Self-forgiveness is difficult as long as one holds on to an impossible standard for oneself and holds on to the need for self-punishment. Intense self-punishing through obsessive thoughts of self-hate, acts of contrition, and intense shame is a way of keeping a connection with the cult leader's damaging attitudes. The emotion of shame tends to interfere with the possibility of self-forgiveness. Can we forgive our bystander status? Can we forgive our own moments of enthrallment? Can we forgive our dissociative responses? Can we forgive our harsh treatment of others while in the cult? How do we handle those who have hurt us? When is long enough and when is the time to move away for the good of one's present life? In cases where suffering has been great, where there have been few, if any, positive experiences, where an individual must avoid further contact with those from the past to avoid further harm to ourselves, the most realistic result we can achieve is helping individuals give up their constant rage and resentment towards others and themselves for their own benefit. Not forgiving is drinking rat poison and then waiting for the rat to die. I love that. That's Anne Lamott. Anger. There are two kinds of anger. One comes from our own inner rage. One focuses outward to put that energy into a positive direction, allowing us to thrive. Actions for good, to improve your life and improve the wider world, can make you feel less like a passive victim of the past. Nori is a wonderful example of actions for good. After she got out of the cult, she reached out to the SGAs of her cult and was there for them as a maternal figure, a loving figure, and helping them in numerous ways. And that really had
They made me an honorary Guru Kuli. I was accepted into the tribe.
And how did that impact your feeling of your bad feelings about yourself?
I wanted to say one thing about the kids. When I was interviewing some of the kids, and I said, well, what did your parents say when you told them about the abuse? And they said, I can't talk to my parents about the abuse because every time I bring it up, they're just, oh, I feel so guilty. Oh, I'm sorry. And they would just go into this guilt thing. They wouldn't be able to get to the pain or get to the fact that their child needed them to talk. They would just be, oh, I feel so guilty. So anyway. Yeah, but I enjoyed, it was good for me when I found out that children were abused. I had no idea. And then they wanted me to help them because I had a master's degree working with juvenile sex offenders. And they were all worried that they would become sex offenders because they had heard that if you're abused that could happen to you. So I was able to talk to them and actually helped get the lawsuits started. Because I think that the lawsuit actually helped because it probably prevented a lot of suicides. So I felt good. I feel good about the kids, and
So she took an action for good.
Yeah, I had to
help. Actions for good will improve your life and improve the wider world and make you feel less passive victim of your past. Moving from victimhood to forgiveness, revenge, reparation, reconsideration. Revenge. Experiencing the wish for revenge on your cult leader is a positive step, particularly for those who could not allow feelings of anger in the cult. Wishing revenge helps us feel less passive and turn the tables. Wishing revenge can give us a sense of mastery and enhance self-esteem. Reparation, acknowledgement shown by the person who has harmed us, is an important step towards recovery from trauma. So if one of the parents who were so overcome by their own sense of guilt and horror that this had happened to their children, were eventually able to come out of that state and say something comforting to their children, that would have gone a long way to help their children repair the damage.
A lot of them did.
And a lot of them ended up doing it. But sometimes it takes time, and parents are dealing with their own enormous sense of guilt.
Yeah, the child abuse thing is. Well, another thing that added to my level of guilt was the level of crime that my group was involved in, because not every group is into murder, child abuse, drug smuggling, assault. It was just unbelievably high level of crime going on around us, and a lot of people didn't know about it.
But you weren't yourself. You were someone else in the group. Receiving an apology and reparation increases our sense of reality. Apologies allow us to take the active position with the choice to forgive or not to forgive. Parents failed in the protector role. They might have failed to respond with empathy when you needed their help. They might have failed to protect you from abuse or neglect. They might have stood as bystanders, unconnected to you, and under the leader's spell, following the leader's harmful wishes. They might have failed to respond with encouragement when you displayed emerging personal abilities not sanctioned by the cult. They might not, as often in Nori's situation, they might not have known what was going on.
The parents?
Yeah.
Oh, nobody knew. None of the parents knew. Some suspected, but it was just hidden so well.
Some parents didn't have adequate parenting themselves, and this all might have contributed to their difficulty in knowing how to adequately parent you. What was the parents' intention? How conflicted were they when they submitted to the demands of the cult leader? How distraught and heartbroken are they presently about how you were treated? Or are they such true believers that they are unable and unwilling to see how they harmed you? If parents don't apologize, some parents may be so overwhelmed with guilt that it is too painful for them to acknowledge the harm of their actions. They cannot face the enormity of the harm that they inflicted on their children. But maybe at a later date.
In Children of God, the children that were abused in Children of God, the ones I know, their parents were not at all repentant. They're still with the group. They don't acknowledge the child abuse that took place. It's really crazy because that was like the worst group for children.
Well, it's a lot to face. And there was one person in my parents' group whose children were Children of God. And he's been courageous enough to try to face it. And it's a tremendous amount to face the
That was
enormity.
terrible. That leader was
He's heroic.
David Berg. He's dead now.
Do you have a sense of their pain about your harm? Do they continue to hold on to the belief that your cult treatment was for your own good? Reconsideration. You might consider resolution of anger within yourself for your own sake. If you are spending too much time focused upon anger towards those from the past without resolution, this hating can become self-destructive as it consumes you, interfering with your present life. Continual rage and self-hidden hating indicates that you are too attached to your cult leader. I've said this before, and or your parents, and this can interfere with your ability to love in the present. You can only change yourself. You have a right to feel angry because of your correct belief that your parents failed you in the cult, and you were cheated out of a childhood. However, you never can change or recover your past, or even change your parents in the present. You can only change yourself. You have a right to feel saddened. Your past has affected you, and there might be continued hurt, resentment, and a desire for restitution. It is human to have those feelings. However, can you have those feelings along with an acceptance that you can only change yourself in the present? You have a right to feel angry. Yes. Can you free yourself from continual rumination and allow yourself to move on for your own sake? The doors behind us have closed. We cannot change the past itself, but we can come to remember, understand, and tell it differently, which may change how we live our lives now, precisely because we are the sort of things in the universe that have minds, sometimes do things for reasons, make choices, ask for and receive forgiveness. Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle.
That's right.
My continual struggle to face and accept my own shortcomings and the shortcomings of others has helped to free me from rumination and ultimately allowed me to move on. I still struggle to change, but I lessen my self-attack when I fail to do so. Being kind also includes protecting myself from exploitation and attack by others. This attitude has lessened my previous feelings of depression and led to a more satisfying life. Thank you.
So we have time now, but 25 minutes for questions. I wanted actually just to start by asking both of you a question, and then I want to open it up to everybody else. As we talked about, the environment within a cult, the control mechanisms, the power imbalance, all of it shifts the members' understanding of themselves in almost every way. So I'm wondering if you can give an example of how you help people find out who they are, regain that or gain a sense of who they really are, and also what helped you get back into knowing who you are.
Okay. When I work with people and they're having attitudes that seem to be post-cult, that they're holding on to post-cult attitudes and really struggling with those attitudes, I typically ask the question, how did you feel about that before you were in the cult? To have them have some perspective and see how now what they're struggling with might be so different from how they felt about before the cult. And there usually is a big contrast, and it's often around the idea of pleasuring themselves in a whole range of ways, and in terms of even punishing themselves that they're doing. Were they that punishing before? What did they enjoy doing before? When they're restricting themselves and feeling that certain behaviors are immoral and all of this. I said, well, how did you feel about that before? And we get into a discussion about how they felt before. And then I talk to them about, well, what was that moment, or how did it happen in the cult that you came to believe this other thing? What was going on? What was said to you? And, they start to discuss that moment or moments, things they were told, and they start to recognize that this was cult mind control. They were moved to believe these things, and it wasn't their natural way of seeing things. So I'll start with that.
Oh, okay. I also, because a lot of this was directed to the SGA generation, but I wanted to say, as far as, I was 22 when I joined ISKCON, so I had a pre-cult life for 22 years, which I was told to erase, but I got it back. But when I was in therapy, I started to realize my pre-cult life, I had kind of idealized it, but my parents were sort of neglected me as a child. And so I didn't get the support and love that would be the archetypal, ideal family upbringing. my parents were very wrapped up in their divorce and, you know, their lovers, and they were, you know, my parents were basically like children. They should have never had kids, but, so I had to realize, actually coming to terms with that was pretty tough too, but I have. And my mother's still living, and she's still very self-centered, and does, you know, like she likes me because I kind of replace her deceased husband and helping her with her computer and her house and everything. But I had to kind of come to terms with that my pre-cult life wasn't all that great to go back to, and that actually the cult helped me grow up. So I kind of wish that the cult experience had been better, so I didn't have to also suffer so much. But one of the things that really helped me get out of the cult and get back to more of a where I wanted to be with myself was going through grad school. And I was really blessed to be able to just go into a graduate school and do a master's degree. And back then, tuition was really cheap. I mean, it was like $1,000 a quarter for everything, including my books. And but going through grad school was really the best thing for me because it was what I needed at the time. And it's helped me ever since. Yeah, but I got back to being myself. I feel like myself. Like I feel like I got out of the cult, and I can kind of separate from all that rhetoric and all that stuff, and getting triggered and all that. I've kind of gotten through most of that. But I've been out for 26 years or 28 years, so.
Rachel, I responded really more for first generation. Would you repeat your question because I want to make it more applicable to SGAs?
Sure. Right. So knowing that the environment and the rules within the group and the inequity in the power balance can have, as you described, can have people really look inward and be very critical of them, but also shift who they really are, what their personality is, what their moral stances are, you know, what their guidelines are, what they're able to tolerate or what they're willing or feel like they have to tolerate. And that for people who have gotten into cults later on, they will sometimes have the ability to go back and remember who they were before and the parts that they liked, they can try to get back to, and even the parts they didn't like so much. They get back to who they really were somehow supposed to be. But for people born and raised in it, who describe to me they feel like they were raised on another planet. And then they have to sort of learn how to be in the world and start fresh. And how you help with that process?
Well, you know, I think so much is education, just like a refugee from a totalitarian, authoritarian country, and who's come to this country and doesn't have a clue how people in this country operate. So a lot of your work with SGAs is very educational, informative, and you just talk about their experiences and talk about giving them a lot of information about other ways of looking at situations and where people hear the point of view of people that they're running into, where they're coming from, the way they're seeing things, and helping them with even distortions. They're making assumptions about a lot of people based upon coming from a dictatorship. And the Americans generally, you know, don't act in the way that people coming from a dictatorship act. So you're giving them information and a lot of resources. There's a wonderful resource on ISKCON, Starting Over. Lydia Borgin has written that resource. It has all kind of information for people. And you use therapy really as a way of just talking over the experience they had and their perception of it, and giving them a sense of other possibilities that they saw it this particular way, but could they also consider that this was going on? Other options, widening their world of experience.
That's why I called the subtitle of my Cult Survivor's Handbook, 7 Paths to an Authentic Life. Because if you, like I left, I had a pre-cult life, but it wasn't really worth much to me. But, you know, and then people who are SGAs leave and they don't have a pre-cult life. But you can still find an authentic life, no matter where you're coming from. Yes.
Yeah, I was in a group which had widespread, free sexuality in inverted commas, where there was no couple relationship.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
So I was in a group without couple relationships. Okay?
Couple.
Couple.
2 people. Oh.
Partner relationship. Yeah. So a lot of children were born in the cult who the father was not known. And then this particular cult dissolved. And then there was a huge blood test process. And the fathers were then verified. Roughly 95% of the children then knew who their father was. But that brought up, including myself, a huge dilemmas for fathers, where you literally found out after that you had this biological child. And as you say, it adds to the complexities of all these kind of situations. But how would you, what advice would you give these fathers? I know a lot of them, and it's still a dilemma. This is 20 odd years after, where there are very unsatisfactory relationships. Some guys I know have 6 children from 6 different mothers. And you obviously cannot give love and nurturing to 6 different parallel situations.
I have some input for that. I think it is possible. Like I remember when my father was dying, and I have this cousin that her father died before she was born, or when she was a baby. And so she always kind of saw my father as her father, Uncle Bill. And he was dying of cancer, and she wanted something from him. And she was all crazy on cocaine, and she was really hard to relate to. And so my father asked me, like, what does she want from me? And why does she always act so hyper and always hyped up? Why can't she just calm down? And I said, Dad, you know, she just wants to be acknowledged. She just wants you to accept what she's saying. She just wants you to accept. It's not something you have to give. And so he made peace with my cousin, and she was very happy with it before, you know, when he died. He died very young, but cancer. He had cancer, terminal cancer for 2.5 years. And I know that it helped him a lot because he was in a position where he was dying and this young relative wanted something from him. He didn't know how to give it. So that might be similar. It's just to let them tell you and just hear them.
And they also, at some point, really should know the truth, and I'm sure they're being told the truth about their past, so that they understand very clearly the context under which all of this happened. And you know, and it's for the
It's so
mother.
much more complicated when kids are involved.
It
Yes,
is.
it really is.
It
Yeah.
is.
Then you also have the role of the mother, who sometimes has reproaches to you as a biological father, even though you were not actually, I mean, you produced a child as a result of sexual activity, but not much else. But to see you post through as the father.
Yeah. Different mothers will see you in different ways.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it becomes very difficult,
Yes.
and there's got to be some kind of negotiation.
Yeah.
And I think the hard thing about coming out of cult too, negotiations don't occur in cults.
Yeah.
And people working out compromises and solutions
Yeah.
that two parents can live with
Mhm.
is probably a novel idea for two people coming out of a cult.
Yeah.
And this is a kind of behavior that these former cult members are going to have to engage in for the
So
benefit.
that's an essential activity.
I was going to say also, I sat in on your presentation, and in your group, a lot of the children were sexually abused by the leaders.
Yeah.
So that's another component.
That's another
not just
component. I
that
didn't want to
they-
bring that up. because
Well,
that's-
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to,
Yeah,
but you said it in
yeah.
your presentation.
Yes,
so I was
of
just
course,
reflecting
yeah.
back that it's not just the
Yeah.
dynamic of the father, the
Yeah.
unknown father,
Yeah.
but also that a lot of these children were abused.
Yeah.
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 Not by the fathers, but by the cult leader.
Yeah.
So they, it makes it even more
The
complicated.
kids also need to know that there were certain behaviors in the context of the cult when they were younger, and some simple explanation of why that was done, that was under the control of the cult leader.
Mhm.
People felt that these were the right behaviors, and it was harmful to children.
Mhm.
And now we're out of that environment, and we don't believe any of those things
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
And we want to keep people safe in
Yeah.
this environment.
Yeah.
We want to keep children safe. And we are so sorry that you guys went through that.
And just sit with the pain, just be in the pain. Don't try to fix it. You can't fix it.
They need acknowledgement, and I'm sure you've done that, but they need acknowledgement of
Yeah.
this horrible thing.
Yeah.
Oh, we have a lot of hands. Okay, okay. I don't know, right there, yes. Yeah, Eva.
Me? Okay. So I'm going to present to you a purely hypothetical situation. I'm struggling with, how much we can hold people who were involved in adults who were involved in cults, how much we can hold them accountable for what they have done. Let's just say hypothetically, an adult following the instructions of a cult leader caused the death of a child. What if that adult is very remorseful now, but the child is still dead? I'm struggling.
I think that if someone was an adult and they did something, they should be held accountable for it, even if they were in a cult. But then they have to come to terms with that guilt. I'm taking kind of a tough love position, but something like they should get into a 12-step group to start to work on their guilt.
Yeah.
12 steps is really good. In my books, I write about that, like just substitute instead of alcohol. I was in a cult and it distorted my judgment. And instead of going into recovery, I became like the cult leaders. And there's ways to deal with, you can use the 12 steps. And so instead of just saying, oh, I was in a cult, whatever, I can't.
Yeah.
Because you're never going to heal that way. You're always going to be a little off.
And I agree with Nori, and maybe even more so. I worked with someone who had committed a crime in a cult, and she was judged by the law that she had committed a crime, and she had to go to prison for the crime.
Yeah.
Now, I, as an expert witness, I gave testimony that she was under the control of a cult leader.
Yeah.
And it was mitigating evidence. However, even with that testimony, I had the belief that she needed to go through the criminal process.
Right. I mean,
So maybe she wouldn't have been she wasn't ultimately dealt as harshly as she would have if it wasn't that circumstance, that other circumstance. But I believe that she should have been punished by the law.
Yeah.
That was,
And she was.
and she was.
Yes, and then you.
So my question is, and in some cases, I know we're talking mostly about SGA and the children. And my question is that in some cases, and you kind of touched on this, in some cases, people in the process of forgiveness, we have to come to that forgiveness ourselves. Sorry. So in the process of forgiveness, sometimes we have to come to that forgiveness ourselves because they won't come back and say, yes, I realize what I did was wrong, whether that was former members, leaders, whatever that is. My question is, sometimes I've worked with people in different contexts, but it applies here, where they really struggle with that concept of condoning as opposed to forgiveness. Like, if I forgive, I'm condoning. What suggestion would you give to work with people like that to help them move towards, like, questions you would ask, skills you would use to help them move from understanding that forgiveness doesn't mean condoning?
I think sometimes it takes a very, very long time to forgive something, and you can work toward it, but you don't have to rush to do it. Like, just for an example, I was raped when I was 14, and by a date rape situation. It was really horrible. And I can't say that I've forgiven that person. I don't know where he is, or if he's living or dead. But I can't say that I've forgiven him, and that's been since 1970. So it's been, whatever that is, years, 40, 50, 60, 46 years or whatever. But I don't feel like I need to forgive him, and maybe someday I will, but I've forgiven myself.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a question for both of you. Because Lorna was talking about the positive interpersonal experience that needs to be experienced in order to have the conscious loving, what was it? Loving conscience.
Right, loving.
Yeah. And also, you, Nori, you said about guilt, that it's not a feeling that can be wished away because it is learned behavior. It has been practiced for so long in behaviors that you have done, like both in thought behaviors. So my question is, like, when you work with this, even if you create an understanding for something, I think, is it also something that needs to be practiced? And do you have some kind of practices or exercises, for example, for SPAs, where they can actually set this in motion? Do you know what I mean? Like, not only talking about everything, because you can have an like understanding for something but not practice it. And if you have practiced the behavior for so long, it's learning, like learning guilt. So you have some practices or exercises for unlearning the guilt and to actually creating these positive interpersonal experiences. Artificially or
do you have some ideas?
Artwork,
No, I was wondering, if you have any specific exercises that you use.
doing writing and work,
Yeah.
artwork,
Yeah.
and journaling, and there's a lot of books. There's a lot of books on the subject. Like the one I read was Gerald Jampolsky, who was he writes about. He was a doctor, and he writes about terminally ill children. And he uses A Course in Miracles. I'm not condoning A Course in Miracles. I don't want to trigger anyone, but a lot of it is just like working on it, like doing writing, doing artwork, talking to people about it, and just relearning like the body. Like just in the last few weeks as I was preparing for this, I was noticing when I do that little beating myself, oh, I got that guy's name wrong, or oh, I cut in front of that guy in line, just those little tiny things that we beat ourselves up for. Like I didn't kill anyone and I didn't steal from someone, it's just like little things. Like why does that bother us so much? So I've been just practicing breathing Like when I feel that, just try to breathe and make that feeling just go away. Like don't get that little, like why put yourself through that? You're the one who controls what goes on in here. But it is a relearning. It's on a body level too. It's your body.
So things, relaxation, using the arts. And also, Eva, you've started to talk about your own parenting coming from bad parenting and hearing talks, going to a group, a parenting group, and getting help from other people and advice from other people about ways of parenting.
So many good parenting
Can be
books
very
out.
useful.
There's so many good parenting books out. When we grew up, they had Dr. Spock, so that was the only book. Everyone followed Dr. Spock.
I find also I do a lot of role play with my clients, just so they can practice saying things in a safer way and address what's coming up for them while they're saying it, and then to see that nothing bad happens by virtue of saying it, and also nothing bad happens to them and nothing bad happens to the person they said it to, which is sometimes the fear also that you can cause harm just by revealing a secret, etc. And so I find that to be all these very sort of practical things, the how-tos, really are very, very helpful. It takes it from being kind of amorphous and makes it very practical.
Also,
yes.
just one last thing before we change talk, another question. But one thing I had to overcome was my anger, because I did have a lot of anger, and it's not nice to get angry. It doesn't cause earthquakes or wars, but still, it's not nice to get angry at people because they're having a hard time too. So I've tried really hard to contain, to be better tempered, and not feel like I just have a right to lash out at people I don't even know. So a lot of it is also you get more self-esteem because you've overcome certain obstacles or defects of character.
We have time for, sorry, go ahead.
I'd just like to add, therapy, talking in therapy to a therapist. I think it's very common I've had the experience of a lot of SGAs coming from very painful backgrounds where the parenting is very either extremely neglectful, abusive, or a combination of both. And they're terrified of having children because they're terrified of replaying the people in their lives again on their children. Well, first of all, you're ahead of the game if you're consciously know what was done to you that you didn't want and really have a lot of concern. But also in checking in with a therapist and talking things over when you're struggling, and it really becomes a safety valve to release a lot of the confusion in those feelings.
We have time for one more quick question. Go ahead.
Well, actually, I wanted to make a comment regarding what you were saying and Nora was saying about 12-step groups, because as I shared in my story yesterday, 12 steps is what got me out of my cult in the first place. And I was actually a closet 12-stepper because I was so scared of this cult. Yeah, because of your question about how to heal.
I found 12-step very triggering, and I think it is.
Yeah, 12-step groups.
Because it's-
I'm not saying you should join a 12-step group,
What I was going
but
to
use
say
the 12
is,
steps.
Codependence Anonymous is very helpful for me regarding identifying patterns, and it deals a lot with guilt and shame. And ACA, which is Adult Children of Alcoholics or otherwise dysfunctional families, I found very helpful also, and in many, many ways. And so
It's hard to encapsulate the 12-step, but I have a whole chapter on it in Also Writer's Handbook. And the thing is that if you get into a bad 12-step group, get out immediately. It can be very culty.
Yep.
They're not professional counselors.
I apologize. I know there are a couple more questions, but we've run out of time. If you want to be able to approach our speakers individually, please do so. I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank our